If this brings you peace, consider subscribing. It helps me keep making these stories for you. And as always, before we begin, I invite you to dim the lights, settle into a soft position, and take one long, slow breath. Let the shoulders drop a little. Let the jaw unclench. Tonight, we'll drift gently into the past, into the steam-filled, echoing halls of Rome's public bathhouses. These were places of water, marble, chatter, and sometimes even gossip as fierce as anything you'd find on social media today. But for us, it will simply be a quiet journey of curiosity, one that moves at the pace of a candle's flicker, calm and steady. Imagine yourself stepping into the warm, humid air of a Roman bathhouse. The doorway creaks open, though in reality, it would have been a grand stone entry. Perhaps you are wrapped in a simple wool cloak, your sandals scuffing against mosaic floors. The smell of olive oil, of damp plaster, and of faint smoke from nearby furnaces mingles in the air. The sound is hushed yet constant, the dripping of water, the low murmur of voices, the faint splash from one of the many pools. For Romans, this was not just about getting clean. It was about being seen, about spending hours in the company of others, letting the warmth loosen tired muscles after long walks through bustling streets at first glance. You might think it was all about luxury. Marble benches, painted ceilings, pillars polished by countless hands. But in truth, the bathhouse was as ordinary to them as a gym or a coffee shop might be to us today. It was a communal rhythm, part of daily life. The rich had their private versions, but the public ones were built to hold hundreds at a time. Emperors invested in them, not only to impress, but to keep the people soothed, entertained, and maybe too distracted to complain about the empire's taxes. As you move deeper inside, imagine the change in temperature from one room to the next. First the apoditerium, the changing hall. Voices echo, sandals shuffle, and attendants may guard baskets filled with your clothes. Romans were not shy about nudity here, though of course, class distinctions still found ways to show themselves. The wealthy had slaves to carry perfumes and oils, while the poor carried only what they could afford, perhaps a scrap of cloth or a borrowed flask of scented oil. Yet in the baths, for at least a moment, everyone dipped into the same pools, and the hierarchy blurred. The frigidarium comes next, the cold room. Its pool sends a chill through your skin, just to imagine it. The water still, clear, reflecting painted ceilings above. Some would shiver, dip quickly, and move on. Others lingered, laughing through chattering teeth, claiming it toughened the spirit. The cold plunge was believed to tighten skin, to refresh the mind, a shock that contrasted sharply with the steaming rooms to follow. Beyond, you hear the crackle of fire, the muffled whoosh of air moving through ducts. This was the hypocaust. System at work, a Roman invention of heating floors by channeling smoke and hot air beneath them. Ingenious, really. It meant entire rooms could be kept warm, even hot, while the fires rumbled out of sight. The caldarium was the crown jewel, the hot room. Clouds of steam drift, turning the air hazy, catching golden flickers of lamplight. Sweat drips, conversation slows, bodies gleam in the humid glow. To sit there was to surrender, to let the body melt into relaxation, perhaps massaged with oil by an attendant. Imagine the hiss as water is ladled onto hot stones, the way droplets spatter and dance. It was both medicine and ritual. And yet, the baths were not silent sanctuaries. They buzzed with energy, like the background hum of a cafe. Here men debated politics, retold stories, bragged about business ventures. Young men showed off muscles, as if flexing was the Roman Instagram feed. Women, too, had their own hours at certain baths, gossip flowing like the water itself, from hair dyes to family dramas. A bathhouse was where news spread faster than any messenger could carry it. It was, in many ways, the empire's social network. And like today's networks, It was filled with everything from meaningful connection to idle chatter, with the occasional scandal whispered just loud enough to be overheard. Imagine the tools. A strigil, a curved bronze scraper, drawn across oiled skin to lift away sweat and dirt. It sounds a little harsh, doesn't it? Like exfoliation taken to the next level. But to Romans, it was soothing, almost therapeutic. The oil would be scented, perhaps with rosemary or lavender, pressed from olives grown under Mediterranean sun. Some even saved the residue, sweat, oil, dust, mixed together. To us, it sounds unappealing, but to them, it was believed to have medicinal value. Yes, the bottled sweat of athletes was a real thing you could buy. Imagine walking home from the bath with a little jar of that as a souvenir. Not everyone adored the baths. Some philosophers sniffed at them, claiming the chatter and the naked crowds were distractions from serious thought. Seneca once complained about the racket, the slapping of hands on shoulders in massage, the squeals of boys diving into water, the cries of sausage sellers hawking snacks. Picture that for a moment, a hot, steamy room, and someone strolling through with sizzling food for sale. Hardly the spa-like silence we might imagine. But still, the baths endured, popular across centuries, from the smallest provincial towns to the grand thermae of Caracalla in Rome itself, vast as a modern shopping mall. And then there was the exercise. Before dipping in, men often wrestled, lifted weights, threw balls in spacious courtyards. The air filled with grunts and laughter, the slap of leather balls caught and tossed again. Sweating through exertion made the plunge into hot water even sweeter. For the poor, it was a chance to imitate the lifestyles of senators and generals, even if just for a moment. For the wealthy, it was another stage to perform strength, endurance, and elegance. The baths were not just water and walls, but entire complexes. Libraries sometimes adjoined them, gardens too, fountains and statues, decorating the pathways. A person could spend an entire day drifting between reading scrolls, strolling in shaded courtyards, soaking in pools, and chatting with friends. It was leisure, but also identity. To be Romo was to bathe regularly, publicly, with others. Cleanliness was civilization, or so they believed. To skip the baths was to invite suspicion, as though you were refusing to take part in society itself. And as the sun set, lamps were lit. Shadows played across mosaics of dolphins, sea gods, and vines curling in endless patterns. The baths took on a different mood then, quieter, softer, almost mystical. The cold stone walls radiated the day's heat, and echoes grew gentler. You might hear only your own footsteps and the steady drip of water into the pools. Perhaps someone whispered a prayer to Hygiene, goddess of health, or to Neptune, lord of the sea. The bathhouse was both earthly and sacred, body and spirit washed in tandem. But what happened when the water ran murky, when the night deepened, when whispers shifted from politics to secrets carried into the dark? That's what we'll explore in the next part. Close your eyes and let yourself drift a little deeper into the scene. The steam still clings to your skin from the caldarium, and yet the Roman bathhouse was never just about the water itself. It was about the transitions, the movements from hot to cold, from loud to quiet, from light to shadow. Imagine walking slowly across the polished stone floor, your bare feet making a soft slap with each step, the sound amplified by domed ceilings. The air shifts as you pass from the heated chambers toward the tepidarium, the warm middle room. It feels like a sigh, neither too hot nor too cold, a perfect balance that calms the body after the extremes. The Romans knew that health was often in the balance, and the gradual change, not the shock. They had no thermometers, but their senses were finely tuned. Here, in the tepidarium, you might lie on a heated bench, close your eyes, and let the warmth seep into your bones. It was a place to linger, to prepare, and to restore. The architecture itself was designed to soothe. Domes stretched overhead, their surfaces painted with mythic scenes. Perhaps Neptune riding dolphins across blue-painted plaster, or Apollo guiding his sun chariot. Natural light streamed through high windows, softened as it filtered through veils of steam. Even today, if you visit the ruins of great Roman baths, you can still sense how enormous they were, vast enough to make one feel small yet secure, embraced by the structure. The echo of footsteps, the trickle of water, the hush of voices must have blended into a kind of gentle background music, like white noise that lulled the mind. But the baths were not only about relaxation, they were also about routine. Imagine that it is the late afternoon, and you are a Roman citizen finishing a day of errands. Perhaps you sold fruit in the market, or argued about politics in the forum, or walked home dusty from the road. Instead of heading straight home, you stop at the baths, just as you would stop for a coffee or check your phone in our time. They were open almost every day, except on occasions of mourning or ritual. The entry fee was modest, just a coin or two, making it accessible to nearly everyone, though children and the poorest might sneak in when attendants looked away. And then there was food. Yes, food found its way into the baths too. Vendors sometimes sold snacks nearby. Chickpeas roasted until they popped, figs dried until sweet and chewy, or little sausages sizzling on portable braziers. The aroma drifted through the corridors, mixing with steam and oil. Imagine reclining on a marble bench, skin glistening from oil and sweat, and munching on something salty and savory. Perhaps not what we imagine for a spa day, but for Romans, eating and bathing and talking all blurred together. The community aspect is important to picture. Picture yourself in the middle of a crowd. Someone is boasting about a business deal. Another laughs about a gladiator's clumsy fight. Someone else is quietly negotiating a favor from a senator. All of this while stripped down, in the most vulnerable of states, in the water. It was a strange kind of democracy, one that temporarily flattened the layers of society, yet also amplified them. Because here you could see bodies unadorned, scars from battle, bellies from indulgence, muscles from training. Every body told its own story, and in a society obsessed with reputation, these silent messages mattered. The baths could even be dangerous places in subtle ways. Disease spread easily in crowded, damp rooms. A scratch, a rash, a fever could pass from person to person unnoticed. And yet, the baths continued, because they were too central to life to abandon. Doctors sometimes recommended them, believing the shifts in temperature and the use of oils would purify the humors of the body. Imagine being prescribed a nice soak instead of a pill. And for many, it did seem to work, even if only as a form of rest and ritual. Some days, games and performances spilled into the bath complex. Jugglers tossing balls, musicians strumming soft tunes, even poets reading verses aloud while steam drifted through the hall. Imagine listening to a love poem while soaking in warm water, your body half submerged, your mind carried by words and rhythm. It was entertainment in a form we might not recognize, but the purpose was the same: to distract, to please, to create a shared experience. And then there were the little superstitions. People sometimes dropped offerings into the pools, coins, amulets, even small carved figurines. The water was not just for bathing. It was also a link to the divine. Springs had been sacred long before Rome built grand bathhouses, and the belief lingered. To soak in water was to wash not only the body, but the soul. Some whispered prayers to Fortuna for luck, to Venus for beauty, to Mars for strength. The steam carried their words upward, dissolving into the air. Now let's pause for a moment. Picture lying back on the edge of a pool, eyes closed, hearing only the ripple of water as someone slips in nearby. The stone beneath you is cool, but the air around you is warm. You smell olive oil mixed with lavender, You hear voices, but they blur like distant radio static until they no longer matter. It becomes almost like meditation. And yet, unlike modern meditation retreats, there is chatter, laughter, and noise all around. Somehow, it was still restful. Perhaps the comfort came not from silence, but from familiarity, from being surrounded by people all doing the same thing, pausing, breathing, releasing tension. But the baths were not without controversy. Some conservative Romans accused them of corrupting morals, of encouraging laziness, of distracting from more serious virtues like farming and soldiering. There were also stories, perhaps exaggerated, of affairs begun in shadowed corners, of whispered plots against politicians. In this way, the baths were like a modern cafe or bar, a place where secrets slipped through the steam. And yet, emperors continued to build them, spending enormous sums. Why? Because the baths kept the people calm, and as any ruler knew, a calm people meant a stable throne. The baths were more than their pools and rooms. They were a stage for daily life, where every Roman, rich or poor, left a trace. Even the walls bore marks, graffiti scratched into plaster, crude drawings, names carved with pride. Imagine running your fingers across one of those walls today, feeling the grooves left by someone's hand 2,000 years ago. It's a reminder that while emperors built the marble, ordinary people filled it with laughter, sighs, and stories. And as the day grew later, shadows lengthened across the tiled floors. Lamps flickered against damp stone, and the crowds thinned. You can imagine the hush settling in, the water stilling, the voices dropping to whispers. But what happened once the attendants closed the doors, once the last bather slipped out into the night? That is something we'll step into in the next part. Now the doors of the bathhouse are closing. The bustling crowds have gone home, and we are left standing in the silence of its after hours. Imagine that for a moment. The voices that once echoed under the domes are gone, leaving only the faintest trickle of water and the occasional creak of the great stone walls as they settle in the night. The baths were never truly empty, though, for attendants remained to clean, to stoke the furnaces, to prepare for the next day's wave of visitors. Their shadows moved softly against the walls, long and flickering in the lamplight, as they carried buckets, swept wet floors, or adjusted the heavy bronze braziers that glowed with coals. It's almost easier to imagine the space now, without the distraction of chatter. The architecture takes center stage. You can picture the vaulted ceilings stretching upward, their plaster surfaces painted in deep blues, reds, and golds. Columns stand tall, their capitals carved with leaves or small figures of gods. And marble tiles beneath your feet feel cool in some rooms, warm in others where the hypocaust system still hums faintly from the fires below. And listen closely. Can you hear the muffled roar of those fires in the distance? It is like a heartbeat, steady and hidden, pumping heat through the hollow spaces under the floors and through clay pipes in the walls. The Romans engineered these buildings with astonishing precision, and at night, when fewer people stirred, you could sense the genius of their design more clearly. This was the time when the furnaces demanded constant attention. Slaves labored to feed wood and charcoal into the mouths of the great hypocaust, sweat dripping down their brows in the dim glow. For them, the baths were not leisure but labor, an endless cycle of heat and ash. The caldereum would not be warm without them, and the tepidarium would not soothe without their effort. Imagine their hands blackened with soot, their backs bent, their ears filled with the crackle of flame, while above them, the marble floors held the memory of luxury. The contrast is sharp, and yet it is part of the story. The baths, magnificent as they were, depended on hidden toil. Still, even in this labor, there was a certain rhythm, a routine. The men who worked the fires knew exactly how much wood each chamber required, how long it would take to heat, and when to ease the flames. They understood the breadth of the building itself. To keep the caldarium steaming by morning, they had to begin hours before sunrise. Imagine walking outside at dawn in Rome and seeing smoke rising steadily from the rooftops of a bathhouse. That smoke was the promise of warmth, of conversation, of a daily ritual waiting to begin. But let's step back inside the empty rooms and notice something unusual. When the pools were still, you could see the mosaics beneath the water more clearly. Many baths were decorated with intricate patterns of dolphins, seahorses, or curling vines made of tiny, colored tiles. By day, they were disturbed by splashes and movement. But at night, with only a lamp reflecting in the surface, they appeared dreamlike, almost alive. Imagine leaning over the edge and seeing the face of Neptune himself rendered in stone beneath the water, his eyes meeting yours as the lamplight shimmered. For some Romans, these images were reminders that bathing was not only a civic act, but a kind of communion with the divine forces of nature. There were also practical matters to consider. The attendants had to skim oils from the surface of the pools, oils left behind from countless bodies rubbed down with perfumed blends. They collected discarded strigils, wiped benches, and sometimes even applied new plaster to cracked walls. The baths were vast, and upkeep was constant. It was not unlike a modern gym closing at night, with workers sweeping the floors, refilling towels, and ensuring the machines were ready for the morning rush. But here, the setting was ancient marble, roaring fires, and steaming water instead of neon lights and treadmills. Now imagine the city outside as the baths stood in the quiet night. The streets of Rome still pulsed with life vendors closing stalls, taverns filling with laughter, musicians drifting through alleyways. But inside the bathhouse, only a few remained, their footsteps echoing. Some whispered that late at night, when the lamps burned low, spirits wandered the halls. After all, water was sacred, and where water lingered, so too might the presence of gods or ancestors. Perhaps these were just stories told to frighten children into coming home on time. Or perhaps, in the faint haze of steam, shadows really did seem to move a little too deliberately, like unseen figures passing between columns. And what of the echoes of conversations that once filled these spaces? You might imagine that if you pressed your ear to a wall, you could still hear them. Faint whispers of senators bragging, poets reciting, women gossiping about neighbors, boys laughing in the frigidarium. The baths stored voices in memory, in the way a theater holds the energy of performances long past. Even empty, they hummed with presence. The Romans themselves noticed this quality. One writer, Pliny, described the atmosphere of bathhouses with a kind of exasperation, complaining about the racket of weights dropping, balls bouncing, masseurs slapping flesh, and food vendors calling out. But he also admitted it was the sound of Roman life itself, unavoidable and somehow reassuring. To step into silence, after all, it would have been a rare experience, perhaps both unsettling and peaceful. Like hearing the hush after a concert ends. In this nighttime quiet, you might picture a single bather slipping in, long after most had gone. Maybe a wealthy man with the privilege to linger, or a philosopher seeking solitude. He lowers himself into the warm pool, sighs, and lets the water lap around him. The sound seems louder now, each ripple echoing. Perhaps he thinks of his day, or rehearses an argument he will make tomorrow in the forum. Perhaps he simply stares into the mosaics and drifts into a kind of waking dream. The bath, even nearly empty, was a stage for reflection. As the hours pass, lamps burn low, and attendants finish their work. Soon, the baths will be ready for the cycle to begin again, as dawn breaks and crowds return. But before we leave this quiet night, consider how the baths were more than just architecture. They were living spaces, breathing with fire, steam, voices, and even silence. They embodied the Roman belief that public life and private life intertwined, that to cleanse the body was to participate in community, And yet, one question lingers in the steam. Who exactly visited these baths, and how did their experiences differ across age, gender, and status? In the next part, we will slip into their sandals and see what a day in the baths might feel like through their eyes. Imagine yourself now as someone stepping into the baths, not as an observer, but as a participant. You have coins in your pouch, sandals on your feet, and a sense of anticipation. The bathhouse was never quite the same for everyone, because who you were in Roman society shaped the way you moved through its chambers. Let us wander slowly through those differences, and picture what it might have felt like depending on your life and station. Perhaps you are a senator, draped earlier in a fine toga, now stripped down in the apoditerium, the changing room. You hand your clothes to a trusted slave, who waits nearby with your perfumes, strigils, and soft towels. You know that your presence here is noticed. The bath is as much a stage as it is a spa, and every glance at your scar from battle, every nod exchanged with a rival, carries weight. For you, the baths are not just about cleansing, but about being seen, reminding others that you are still vigorous, still strong, still relevant. You recline later in the caldarium, the hot room, letting attendants rub oil into your shoulders while you casually discuss alliances and debts with another senator. It is politics disguised as leisure. Now, picture yourself as a common tradesman, perhaps a baker whose hands still smell faintly of flour and smoke from the oven. You've paid your modest entry fee, perhaps only a single coin, and you shuffle in with the crowd. You do not have attendants to oil your back. You carry your own flask of olive oil, maybe diluted with cheaper scents. You place your clothes in a cubby, watched by a bath attendant, hoping nothing will go missing, and you step into the water alongside men of higher rank. For a moment, in the steam, you are all simply bodies, stripped of toga stripes or badges. The baker might float beside a senator, the craftsman beside a philosopher. The water makes equals of those who never would be equals outside. Yet the subtle differences remain. Who has a slave nearby? Who can afford costly perfumes? Who boasts loudly? And who stays quiet? And then, imagine being a soldier, returning from the frontiers. Your skin bears scars. Your shoulders ache with the memory of carrying heavy armor. For you, the bath is not just social, but medicinal. The hot water soothes muscles worn from marching. The strigil scrapes off grime collected from long marshes, and the plunge into cold water shocks you awake. Perhaps you sit with comrades, laughing about camp life, comparing wounds like badges of honor. The bath is healing, but it is also bonding. After months of sleeping in tents, to sink into heated marble pools feels almost divine. But what if you were a woman? Women did visit baths, though not always at the same times as men. Some baths had separate facilities, while others allowed women entry in the mornings before men arrived. Imagine stepping into a quieter bath, your sandals clicking on the mosaics, the smell of rose oil in the air. The atmosphere here is not about politics, but about appearance, reputation, and the bonds between families. Women might trade gossip, exchange beauty tips, or even strike informal alliances just as powerful as the men's political deals. Perfumes and cosmetics were often shared or sold within these spaces, and hairdressers and attendants worked their art while the steam softened hair and skin. Picture women lounging on benches, laughter echoing softly, while children splashed in shallow pools nearby. And what of the children themselves? Imagine being a Roman boy, chasing a ball into the frigidarium, shrieking as the cold water bites at your skin, while your father pretends not to notice your noise. You see men wrestling in the palestra, the exercise yard, and dream of joining them when you are older. For children, the baths were not about politics or reputation, but about play and about learning the rhythms of Roman life. To them, the baths were simply normal, something they could not imagine living without. Slaves, too, were present in every corner. They carried oils, fetched water, fanned their masters, and cleaned up after them. For them, the bath was rarely about luxury. Yet sometimes, after hours or on certain days, a kind master might allow them a chance to bathe. Picture a young slave dipping quietly into the pool, grateful for a few stolen minutes of warmth. Even within a world of hierarchy, there were small mercies, fleeting moments where the body was cleansed and the spirit lifted. Foreigners also visited, curious about this Roman custom. Picture a Greek traveler, skeptical at first, for in his homeland, the gymnasium was the place for such activities, not vast communal baths. Yet he steps in, feels the heat, hears the hum of voices, and understands why the Romans adore these spaces. Even if he chuckles at their obsession with oil and scraping, he cannot deny the comfort of the caldorium's warmth, or the pleasure of floating under mosaics of gods he does not worship. For him, the bath is a window into Roman identity, a way of grasping what it means to be part of this empire. These differences mattered, but the beauty of the baths was that all these people crossed paths. Senators brushed shoulders with soldiers, bakers with philosophers, women with neighbors, children with strangers. It was a place where the body was revealed, and in that revealing came a strange sort of honesty. You could not entirely hide who you were in a bath. Your scars, your posture, your skin, your smell of perfumes or lack of them all, spoke silently. It was a theater of bodies, telling stories more loudly than words. And yet, imagine the humor in it too. Perhaps a man slips on the wet floor, and his grand dignity vanishes as he splashes into the pool, his rivals chuckling quietly. Or perhaps someone brags too loudly about his strength, only to be bested in a casual wrestling match in the palestra. In this way, the baths humbled as much as they elevated. So when you think of Roman bathhouses, don't imagine only emperors reclining in marble pools. Think of bakers, soldiers, children, slaves, women, and travelers. Each carried their own story into the steam, and each left a trace upon the walls. To step into a Roman bath was to step into the heart of society itself, where everyone's path converged. But how did these spaces look in their grandest form? What did it feel like to walk into one of the great imperial thermae, built by emperors to dazzle and overwhelm? That is the journey we'll take in the next part. Now, let us leave behind the small neighborhood baths, those modest places where a baker or a soldier might spend an hour after work. And let us walk instead toward the most spectacular creations of Rome, the great imperial thermae. These were not simply bathhouses, but vast complexes that rose like palaces from the ground, designed to overwhelm the senses and proclaim the glory of emperors. Imagine approaching one of them in the late afternoon, the sun casting long golden beams across the city, and there before you stands a building so immense that it feels like a small city unto itself. The baths of Caracalla, for instance, could hold thousands at once. Think of it, thousands of people, all bathing, exercising, strolling, reading, and talking within one immense enclosure. The scale alone is staggering. The facade towers above you, carved stones stretching high with arches and windows, colossal statues perched in niches, staring down like guardians of leisure. You pass through enormous doors into a vestibule, where the floor glitters with colored marble imported from across the Empire, green from Greece, purple from Egypt, black from Africa, white from the quarries of Carrara. Each slab tells a story of trade, conquest, and wealth, all under your feet. The ceilings soar above, coffered and painted with stars, so high that voices echo and footsteps sound like distant drums. Imagine the first breath of air inside, a swirl of scents, damp stone mingled with perfumes, smoke from the furnaces drifting faintly through hidden vents, the sharp tang of sweat, and the sweet hint of honey cakes sold by vendors near the doors. It is not just a bath, it is a sensory orchestra. The sounds add to the mix, the splash of water in multiple pools, the cries of children, the rhythmic slap of hands in massage, the deep, booming laughter of men boasting of their deeds, and somewhere in the distance, the faint strum of a lyre dot within these great thermae. The layout was a kind of journey. First the palestra, the open courtyard for exercise, where men wrestled and trained under the open sky, framed by porticos lined with columns. The sun beats down, sweat glistens, dust rises as sandals scuff the ground. This is the prelude, the place to prepare your body before the cleansing waters. From there, you step into the baths themselves, beginning with the apoditerium, then moving as your body desires through the cold plunge, the warm soak, and finally the steaming hot caldarium. Each chamber grows in intensity, the architecture shifting from bright and airy to dim and enveloping, until you feel as though you are dissolving into mist. But the imperial baths were more than just this sequence. They contained libraries where you could read scrolls and discuss philosophy, lecture halls where speakers debated, gardens where fountains trickled among manicured hedges, and even small theaters for performances. You might leave your hot soak and wander into a library, your skin still damp, to hear a reading of Virgil or Homer. Imagine reclining on a bench, a scroll in your hands, while the smell of steam and oil still clings to your hair. It is an odd mingling of worlds, physical indulgence and intellectual pursuit side by side. The emperors who built these baths understood their power. Caracalas were among the most famous, vast enough to be remembered even as ruins today. They were not just gifts to the people, but also acts of propaganda, reminders that Rome's leaders cared for their citizens, or at least wished to appear as though they did. Bread and circuses, yes, but also baths. To give the people water, heat, and beauty was to earn their loyalty. Imagine standing in the caldarium, looking up at a dome nearly as grand as the Pantheon's, and knowing that it was built by imperial order. Every stone whispered of authority. At the same time, these baths were astonishing feats of engineering. Aqueducts brought in streams of water from miles away, filling cisterns large enough to feed the endless pools. The hypocaust system, with its underground channels and stacks of tiles, heated floors and walls to precise temperatures. Ventilation shafts kept the steam from suffocating visitors. Even the lighting was deliberate. Narrow windows allowed shafts of sunlight to pierce the dimness, illuminating mosaics of gods and heroes. It was art and science woven together, functioning seamlessly, centuries before electricity or modern plumbing. Imagine yourself moving slowly from room to room, tracing this path. In the frigidarium, the cold water embraces your body, shocking but invigorating. The pool is vast, as wide as a modern swimming pool, and lined with statues of nymphs and river gods. You dip under the water and emerge to see sunlight slanting through high windows, refracting into shimmering patterns. Then you move to the tepidarium, your body now adjusted, floating in warmth as mosaics of dolphins and seashells spread beneath you. In the caldarium, the steam blurs vision, and you feel the heat rise through the marble bench into your skin. You sit, close your eyes, and let the world fade. It is not simply bathing, it is a ritual of transformation, body and mind alike. But beyond the grandeur, life in these thermae carried a peculiar blend of the ordinary and the extraordinary. Picture a fruit seller arriving with sticky figs and a tray of honey cakes, shouting above the steam. Picture two philosophers arguing so loudly that others roll their eyes until one slips on wet stone and laughter erupts. Picture a young man nervously flexing his muscles, hoping to catch the attention of a woman in the women's section, though she is more interested in the gossip whispered at her side. Even in marble halls, humanity remained wonderfully ordinary. And yet, think too of how overwhelming it might have felt for someone visiting for the first time. Imagine a farmer from the countryside, used to washing in a cold stream, now stepping into a space filled with towering ceilings, hot air, colored stone, and crowds of hundreds. He might feel small, dizzy, dazzled by the scale of it all. For him, the Thermae were not just baths, they were Rome itself, embodied in stone and water, a place that captured the empire's might and beauty. And still, beneath the glamour, lingered small details, graffiti scratched into walls, bits of discarded strigils forgotten in corners, children's laughter echoing too loudly. Even in the largest Thermae, the human fingerprints were everywhere. It was not just the emperors who made these baths. It was the people filling them day after day, giving them life. So the next time you hear the word bath, think beyond a tub in a quiet room. Think of marble halls filled with steam. Think of libraries attached to hot pools. Think of emperors winning loyalty by heating entire buildings for strangers. That was Rome at its most dazzling. But even the grandest baths were not eternal. Fires, invasions, and the slow crumble of time would eventually bring silence to these once busy halls. What was it like when those echoes faded, when ruins replaced steam? That is the story we will step into in the next part. Close your eyes and let us drift forward through time. The steam still clings in our imagination, but now the air is cooler, the lamps burn lower, and silence begins to stretch across marble halls that once pulsed with life. The truth is that even the mightiest Roman bathhouses could not last forever. Though they were marvels of engineering, their grandeur depended on constant fuel, constant water, constant labor. And empires, like people, grow tired. Imagine the decline beginning slowly, almost imperceptibly. Perhaps the aqueducts that fed the cisterns fall into disrepair, a crack left unmended, a channel clogged with debris. The water pressure falters. The pools are not as full as they once were. The cold plunge feels less refreshing when the water is murky. Or picture the hypocaust system, those intricate brick pillars beneath the floors. One collapses under the weight of centuries. The heat becomes uneven scalding in one quarter, tepid in another. Complaints ripple among bathers, but repairs are costly, and officials delay. The baths depended on wood, mountains of it, carted in every day to keep furnaces blazing. During times of peace, this was manageable. But when wars dragged on, and supplies thinned, the fires dimmed. Picture entering the caldarium, expecting clouds of steam, only to find a lukewarm room and a thin haze of smoke. The experience that once felt divine now seems disappointing, a reminder that Rome itself is struggling. And then, as the centuries passed, the empire fractured. Invaders pressed against borders, taxes grew harsher, and public works began to fail. Imagine the baths during this time still magnificent, but less well kept. A mosaic missing tiles here, a statue toppled there, plaster peeling from painted ceilings. The grandeur remained, but it felt worn, like a faded garment, once splendid, but now frayed. People still came, of course, because the ritual was ingrained. But some must have wondered, if the baths, the very heart of Roman leisure, were cracking, what else in Rome was weakening too? The decline was not uniform. Some baths thrived long after others faltered, their fires still roaring, their aqueducts still intact. But the signs were undeniable. Picture an attendant trying to sweep away grime with a broken broom, or a furnace slave coughing from the smoke of damp wood. Imagine the baker who once came daily, now skipping visits because the entry fee feels too high under new taxes. Imagine a senator choosing instead to build a private bath in his villa, away from the crumbling public halls. Slowly, the communal rhythm loosened, and then the invasions came. In the 5th century, when the Goths and Vandals swept into Rome, aqueducts were cut deliberately to weaken the city. Without water, the baths could not survive. Imagine standing in the frigidarium as the pool drains dry, leaving behind cracked mosaics and patches of algae. The silence is different. Now not peaceful, but eerie. Once, the baths had been filled with laughter and argument, with the splash of children and the sighs of weary men. Now only wind stirs the dust. Think of the baths of Caracalla, once able to host thousands at once. In their prime, they glittered with marble. Their gardens bloomed. Their libraries overflowed with scrolls. Yet in the centuries after Rome's fall, they became hollow shells. Grass sprouted between broken stones. Birds nested in domes where senators once reclined. Travelers wandered through, marveling at ruins already ancient, their voices echoing where once 1,000 conversations blended into one great hum. And yet, the baths never fully disappeared. Some were converted into other uses: fortresses, workshops, even churches. The stones were too valuable to waste. Mosaics were pried up, marble columns carted off to build cathedrals or palaces. The ruins became quarries for new dreams. Imagine men with chisels hacking at a statue of Neptune, not out of disrespect, but simply because the marble could be reused. The divine beauty of one age became the raw material of another. Still, even as structures crumbled, the memory of the baths lingered. Medieval writers, wandering through the ruins of Rome, wrote in awe of the massive arches, unable to comprehend how such spaces had once been filled with water and warmth. To them, the ruins felt otherworldly, almost impossible. Some whispered that giants must have built them, because ordinary men could never have constructed such marvels. The scale of Roman baths outlived even the knowledge of how they worked. And imagine yourself walking through those ruins centuries later, as a pilgrim or a poet. The stone is cracked, the air cool and empty. Weeds push through mosaics. A lizard darts across marble. The whisper of history lingers in the wind. You cannot see the steam or hear the chatter anymore, but if you close your eyes, you might still feel them. The baths became ghosts, haunted not by spirits, but by the memory of countless lives that once pulsed within their walls. It is a humbling thought. A place that once held the daily heartbeat of an empire, now reduced to silence, to fragments. And yet, in that silence, there is also peace. The baths, stripped of their function, became monuments to impermanence. They remind us that all things, even marble, even empires, eventually soften and fade. But even in decline, the idea of the bath never vanished completely. Private bathhouses, smaller and simpler, survived in villas and towns. And centuries later, echoes of the Roman bath would return in new forms: Turkish hammams, Russian banyas, Victorian bathhouses, and modern spas. The Romans had planted a seed so deep in human culture that it would sprout again and again, long after the original buildings had turned to rubble. And so, as we stand in the ruins, surrounded by crumbling arches and silent pools, the question arises: what exactly happened inside those walls before the silence came? What stories, what traumas, what small moments of life played out in the steam? In the next part, we'll step closer, not into decline, but into the daily rituals themselves, what it truly felt like, hour by hour, to be a Roman bather at the height of the empire. Let us now return to the baths, not in their silence or their decline, but in their prime, when the furnaces roared, the aqueducts poured in fresh water, and the mosaics gleamed under the lamplight. Imagine waking one morning in the city of Rome, the hum of the streets already alive with traders, carts, and voices. For many citizens, the day would not be complete without a visit to the baths. It was not only a place to wash, but a ritual as steady as the rising sun. Tonight, as you listen, we will walk step by step through that daily rhythm. Picture yourself leaving your domus or your modest insula apartment in the late afternoon, coin in hand. The sun is still warm on the paving stones, but shadows are growing long. The streets are crowded with others heading the same way. sandals slapping the stone, the air rich with the smell of baked bread, fish, smoke, and dung. The baths draw everyone: senators, bakers, soldiers, children. By the time you arrive at the grand entrance, the anticipation is thick. Like arriving at a theater before the show begins, you hand over your small entry fee. Sometimes nothing at all if the emperor has declared a free day, and step inside. The first stop is the appetiterium, the changing room. It is a wide hall lined with niches and hooks for clothes. You undress, handing your garments to an attendant. Imagine the feel of the cool air on your bare skin, the mix of embarrassment and liberation as you stand among others, stripped of rank and costume. Here, a senator's toga and a baker's tunic are equally reduced to bundles of cloth. Everyone becomes simply human again. From there, you step toward the palestra, the open-air courtyard. The sound is lively men shouting as they wrestle, balls bouncing against the ground, the thump of fists into punching bags filled with sand. Some are running laps, others are lifting weights, the air heavy with sweat and dust. This is exercise Roman style, the prelude to cleansing. Imagine yourself joining in, tossing a leather ball, laughing as you miss the catch and it rolls away. Your body warms, your heart pounds, and sweat beads across your forehead. It is all preparation for the indulgence of the baths themselves. When you are ready, you return inside and approach the frigidarium, the cold room. The pool before you is wide, its surface gleaming like polished glass. You dip a toe in, and the chill makes you gasp. With a deep breath, you plunge in fully, the shock coursing through your veins. Your skin tingles, your lungs expand. Some linger, enjoying the bracing clarity of the cold water. Others dart in and out, their teeth chattering as they laugh with friends. For many, this plunge is a ritual of courage, a test of resilience, and a way to prepare for the warmth to come. From there, you move slowly into the tepidarium, the warm room. This chamber is calm, its atmosphere gentle, the water neither hot nor cold. Imagine easing into the pool, your muscles relaxing as the warmth seeps into your body. Around you, people recline on marble benches, talking softly, rubbing oil into their arms, scraping away sweat and dirt with curved bronze strigils. The scent of olive oil and herbs drifts in the air, rosemary perhaps, or lavender. The sound is steady, but not overwhelming voices echoing gently, water lapping against stone. It is a place to linger, to talk, to pause before the heat. And then, at last, the coldarium, the hot room. Here the air is thick with steam, almost blinding, the warmth enveloping you like a heavy cloak. The marble floors are hot beneath your feet. The benches radiate heat from below, and the water in the pool is nearly scalding. Imagine sitting down, sweat streaming from your brow, your body surrendering fully to the heat. Attendants walk among the bathers, offering massages, pouring ladles of hot water, scraping skin with practiced strokes. Some throw perfumed oils into the fire, sending bursts of fragrance into the steam. The sound here is subdued, almost meditative whispers softened by mist. The occasional hiss of water against hot stone. You feel yourself drifting, as if the heat is unraveling not just the knots in your muscles, but the tightness in your thoughts. The caldarium was, for many Romans, a kind of therapy. Doctors recommended it for health. Philosophers used it for contemplation. And yet, it was also social. Imagine two men debating politics through the haze, their voices slow and heavy in the warmth. Imagine a young man showing off his endurance, sitting longer than anyone else, until his skin is flushed red and he emerges triumphant. The caldarium tested the body as much as it soothed it. After such intensity, you might step back into the frigidarium once more, plunging again into the cold to close your pores, to awaken your senses. The contrast is sharp, almost shocking, but it leaves you refreshed, cleansed, renewed. You emerge shivering but smiling, the cold water still clinging to your skin. The final step is often a massage. You recline on a low marble slab while an attendant rubs oil into your limbs, scraping away the residue with a strigil. The sensation is both soothing and strange, the scrape firm but not painful, the oil leaving your skin smooth. Imagine lying there, your eyes half closed. As the chatter of others drifts around you, the smell of oil and herbs filling your nose, the warmth of the room lingering in your muscles. And then, perhaps, you wander to the libraries or gardens attached to the baths. You might read a scroll, listen to a poet, or stroll among fountains, the evening air cooling your damp skin. Perhaps you buy a honey cake or a handful of roasted chickpeas from a vendor, munching as you talk with a friend. By the time you leave, the sky is darkening, and the lamps of the city are glowing. You step back into the streets refreshed, not just in body, but in spirit, ready for whatever comes next. This daily ritual bound Romans together. It was more than hygiene, more than luxury. It was identity. To be Roman was to bathe. To skip the baths was to step outside society's rhythm, to become suspect. The baths were a stage, a sanctuary, and a second home all at once. But while the daily rituals soothed and united, the baths also hid another layer of intrigue. For beneath the chatter and steam, deals were made, secrets whispered, and scandals born. In the next part, we'll step into that shadowy side, the gossip, the politics, and the whispers that made the baths as dangerous as they were delightful. Now that we have bathed in the warmth and lingered in the calm of Roman daily ritual, let us shift our attention to the shadows within the steam, the conversations that drifted just a little too quietly, the glances exchanged when attendants turned away. For while the baths were a sanctuary of relaxation, they were also a stage for gossip, politics, and schemes. Imagine standing in a vast marble hall where whispers echo almost as loudly as shouts, and realize that not all the talk was innocent. The baths were, in many ways, the social network of ancient Rome. They were a place where reputations could be polished or destroyed within a single afternoon. Imagine a senator reclining in the caldarium, his rival nearby. Their conversation begins casually. The weather, the grain supply, the latest gladiatorial games. But as steam thickens, their words sharpen into coded barbs. A mention of a tax delay might actually be a reminder of debts owed. A casual laugh might mask a threat. In these heated rooms, politics was not only in the Senate House, but woven into the ordinary hum of daily leisure. Now picture the gossip. Women in their allotted hours, lounging in the tepidarium, passing stories like tokens. Whose daughter had married well? Whose husband was seen sneaking away from the Subura, Rome's red light district? Whose fortune had mysteriously grown while others struggled? These whispers mattered. In a society obsessed with honor and reputation, gossip was more than idle chatter. It was a weapon. A rumor born in the steam of the baths could travel swiftly into the forum, the markets, and the ears of powerful men. Even children heard the murmur of these stories. A boy splashing in the frigidarium might overhear his father muttering about the emperor's new law. He might repeat it in the street, turning private talk into public knowledge. In this way, the baths were like a river, carrying information from one corner of the city to another. Truth mingled with lies, facts with embellishments, until it was difficult to tell them apart. And with gossip came scandal. Imagine a wealthy man stepping into the apoditerium, only to discover his jewelry missing upon return. Accusations fly. Was it the attendant, another bather, or perhaps staged to cover a gambling debt? Tempers flare. A brawl breaks out, sandals slipping on wet marble, shouts echoing off high ceilings. The baths could be calming, yes, but they could also erupt into chaos. There were stories, too, of lovers meeting in secret. Though the baths were public, They also offered corners where steam curled thick and shadows lingered. A glance across the pool, a whispered plan, and suddenly the bath became more than a place of cleansing. Writers of the time hinted at such affairs, sometimes condemning them, sometimes describing them with amused resignation. Imagine two figures slipping into a quiet alcove, their laughter muffled by steam, while the crowd remains unaware, or perhaps chooses not to notice. For some, the baths were also places of business. Picture a merchant spreading out samples of cloth on a dry bench, showing them to a potential buyer fresh from the tepidarium, or a teacher reciting lessons to eager boys in between plunges into the pools. Deals were struck, jobs offered, and promises made. In the warmth of the baths, people were softened, perhaps more willing to agree. You might even say the baths were the Roman equivalent of a networking event, with far fewer suits and far more olive oil. The emperors themselves knew the power of these whispered networks. That is why they invested so heavily in building and maintaining the baths. By offering citizens a place to relax and socialize, they gave them less time to plot rebellions or complain too loudly. Bread, circuses, and baths, these were the tools of control. But still, not all could be contained. Imagine an informer blending into the crowd, listening for careless words against the emperor, noting names whispered too boldly in the steam. Paranoia was never far away in Rome, and even in the baths, ears were always listening. And then there were the philosophers. Some complained bitterly about the noise and frivolity, yet they too visited. Seneca wrote about the clamor, the shouting, the splashing, the endless racket of life in the baths. To him, it was both a nuisance and a reminder of human folly. Imagine him sitting stiffly in a corner, eyes narrowed, listening to men boast about trivial victories, all while he pondered the meaning of virtue. Perhaps he scowled at the food vendors, hawking sausages in a space meant for cleansing. Yet even Seneca knew that the baths were essential. They revealed the character of Rome itself, not think also of the dangers of illness. In the crowded pools, diseases spread quietly. A rash here, a fever there. Some whispered that spending too long in the hot rooms weakened the body. Others swore by the baths as medicine. Imagine the rumors swirling. Did you hear that Marcus fell ill after the caldarium? Perhaps the gods are angry. Perhaps the water is cursed. Such fears mixed with gossip, creating new tales. And there was humor, too, in these tangled webs of rumor. Imagine a man bragging loudly about his new villa, only for another to remind him, gently but loud enough for others to hear, that he still owes money for his last project. Laughter ripples through the room, the boaster's pride deflated. Or picture a boy, imitating the gestures of a pompous senator, earning giggles from bathers who know exactly whom he is mocking. The baths could humble the mighty and amuse the humble. A theater where all played their parts dot by now. You can see how the baths were not just marble and water, but a living organism of rumor, laughter, schemes, and secrets. To enter them was to step into the bloodstream of Roman society, where news spread faster than any messenger could carry it. A whispered insult here could become tomorrow's scandal there. And through it all, the steam rose, blurring the lines between truth and imagination. But beyond the gossip and intrigue, there was another layer to the Roman bathing ritual, one that reached into the spiritual and the sacred. For while the baths were places of politics and play, they were also connected to deeper beliefs about the body, the gods, and purification. In the next part, we will wander into that quieter, more mysterious dimension, how the Romans saw bathing as not just cleansing the flesh, but honoring something greater. Now let us move slowly from the chatter and the intrigue of the bathhouse into something quieter, something that hums beneath the surface, like the low vibration of water itself. For to the Romans, bathing was not only a social activity, nor only a political stage. It carried with it a sense of the sacred. Imagine yourself once more in a vast marble chamber, steam swirling, lamps glowing, water trickling into a pool. Beneath the human noise, there is an older rhythm, one that ties water to gods, spirits, and purification. Long before Rome built its grand thermae, springs and rivers were honored as divine. The earliest Latins left offerings at streams, groves, and natural baths. Water was life itself, flowing from the gods into the earth. To step into it was not only to wash away dirt, but to refresh the soul. Even as Rome expanded and turned nature into architecture, enclosing water in marble and directing it through aqueducts, this reverence never entirely disappeared. To bathe was to honor Hygiea, goddess of health, or Salus, goddess of well-being, or even Neptune, whose dominion over the seas echoed in the mosaics of dolphins and shells beneath the pools. Picture the frigidarium, its cold pool gleaming like a mirror. A bather steps in, shivers, and whispers a prayer under his breath, not to withstand the chill, but to thank the gods for vitality. Or imagine a woman dipping her hand into the water and tracing it across her forehead in a small act of blessing before submerging herself. These gestures were quiet, often unnoticed, yet they gave the baths a layer of meaning beyond leisure. Even the architecture hinted at this sacred dimension. Many bathhouses were decorated with mythological scenes. Apollo, god of healing, riding across the ceiling. Hercules, symbol of strength, carved into columns. Venus, goddess of beauty, painted into alcoves. These were not random decorations. They reminded bathers that their time in the water was connected to forces larger than themselves. You might say that the Romans prayed with their bodies rather than their words, offering the act of bathing as a kind of devotion. Think also of the purification rituals. Before certain ceremonies, Romans were expected to be clean. Priests, augurs, and those about to sacrifice at temples often visited the baths. To appear before the gods with sweat and grime was improper. Imagine the flow of citizens on festival days, preparing themselves in the steamy caldarium before marching to the Capitoline Hill with incense and offerings. The baths were part of that cycle, a necessary step between the ordinary and the divine. There was also the belief in the medicinal power of water. Doctors, known as medici, prescribed bathing as treatment for ailments. A man with aching joints was told to linger in the caldarium, letting the heat loosen his stiffness. Another, feverish, might be instructed to dip into the frigidarium to cool the blood. Herbal infusions were added to oils, their fragrances rising like incense in the hot air. Imagine rosemary and myrtle steeping into steam, the scent sharp and invigorating. To the Romans, this was not superstition. It was science, or at least the science of their time. And yet, superstition lingered at the edges. Amulets were sometimes dipped in pools to charge them with sacred energy. Coins were thrown into fountains within the bath complexes, offerings to the gods of water. People whispered that the steam carried away not just dirt, but also ill fortune. Imagine someone quietly releasing a worry into the pool, watching the ripples carry it away, as though the water itself had taken on the burden. Some bathers believed in omens. If a strigil slipped from one's hand and clattered loudly, it was a bad sign. If oil floated on the water in certain shapes, it might foretell health or sickness. Attendants might laugh at such things, but many took them seriously. After all, in a world where gods were believed to walk among men, even the smallest sign could be loaded with meaning. There were darker associations too. Some whispered that spirits lingered in abandoned pools, especially at night. The echo of dripping water could sound like voices, the swirl of steam like a figure moving unseen. A slave stoking the furnace might tell stories of shadows in the caldarium, of ancient gods displeased with careless bathers. These tales blended fear with respect, reminding all that water, though tamed in marble pools, was still a force beyond human control. And imagine the silence of the baths at dawn before the first visitors arrived. The fires were already burning, the pools already warm, but the halls were empty. In that stillness, one could almost hear the heartbeat of the building, the crackle of flame beneath the floor, the drip of condensation on stone. It was like being in a temple, but a temple not of statues and sacrifices, but of warmth and water. Perhaps this is why so many poets compared the baths to sacred groves. They were places where body, mind, and spirit aligned. If only for a brief hour, even laughter and gossip had their sacred echoes. To Romans, health was not only of the body but of the soul, and laughter itself was thought to renew vitality. Imagine the voices in the Tepidarium, their tones rising and falling like chants, stories blending into steam. This, too, was a form of prayer not to a god, but to the shared life of the community. By bathing together, Romans reaffirmed their place in the cosmos. Just as much as they cleansed their skin out, it is strange to think that what we might now see as mundane, a bath, could hold such layers of meaning. Yet the Romans lived in a world where every act had significance. Washing was not only about dirt, but about health, honor, and even destiny. To emerge from the baths was to step into the world renewed, body and spirit alike. But what of those who did not bathe? What of the critics, the skeptics, the philosophers who saw the baths as signs of weakness or corruption? In the next part, we will listen to their voices and discover why not all Romans were enchanted by the allure of marble pools and steaming halls. Not everyone in Rome adored the baths. To some, they were wonders of engineering, temples of health, and sanctuaries of leisure. But to others, they represented indulgence, distraction, even moral decay. Imagine walking through the echoing Apoditerium and hearing not only laughter and gossip, but also the grumble of a philosopher, muttering that all this steam and oil was softening the Roman spirit. For as long as the baths stood, there were voices warning that they might be weakening what it meant to be Roman. The Stoics, for example, were suspicious of excess. Seneca, one of the most famous Stoics, wrote with irritation about the racket of the baths. He complained of masseurs slapping bodies, of men grunting as they exercised, of food sellers calling out sausages and wine. To him, the baths were noisy, distracting, a place where people sought pleasure rather than virtue. Imagine him sitting stiffly in a corner, trying to focus on his thoughts, while a group of boys splashed nearby, their laughter echoing through the caldarium. For Seneca, it was not that bathing itself was wrong. It was necessary for health and hygiene. But the culture of idleness that grew around it made him uneasy. Other critics worried about luxury. The earliest Romans had been proud of their simplicity, bathing in rivers or washing quickly at home. By the time of the Empire, marble baths with gilded ceilings and perfumed oils seemed a far cry from those rugged beginnings. Conservative voices argued that too much time in the baths softened warriors into loungers. They asked, how can a man endure the chill of a battlefield dawn if he cannot bear to miss his evening soak in heated water? Imagine an old soldier shaking his head at young men flexing in the palestra, muttering that Rome was once built by farmers who washed in cold streams. There were moral fears, too. The mingling of bodies naked, oiled, relaxed, gave rise to suspicions of impropriety. Writers whispered of affairs that began in steamy alcoves, of political deals sealed in secret corners, of men and women meeting in ways that polite society pretended not to notice. Even when men and women bathed separately, critics claimed that the atmosphere of indulgence invited temptation. Imagine a scandal breaking out when a senator is accused of an affair that began not in the shadows of a bedroom, but in the steam of the caldarium. Some emperors shared these concerns. Marcus Aurelius, himself a Stoic, used the baths but did so with restraint, more out of necessity than pleasure. Others tried to regulate times, separating classes or genders, though such rules often bent in practice. And still, the baths grew larger, more luxurious, as if Rome itself could not resist the allure of heat and water. Critics fumed, but the people continued to pour through the doors, coins in hand, ready to soak. There were also practical concerns. The baths were expensive to maintain. The wood to fuel the furnaces, the water carried by aqueducts, the armies of attendants and slaves. It was all a massive burden on the state. Some argued that the money spent on marble mosaics and vast domes could have built fortresses or fed the poor. Imagine a politician standing in the Senate, declaring that every bucket of water poured into the caldorium was a bucket stolen from Rome's defenses. And yet, emperors knew that to close the baths would be more dangerous than to fund them. A disgruntled people could be soothed with bread, circuses, and steaming pools. The baths were not only leisure, they were politics in stone, and still there were voices of humor in the criticism. Martial, the poet, joked about bath culture often. He mocked men who boasted of their strength while lounging idly in tepid pools, and others who carried more perfume than oil. He teased those who treated the baths as catwalks, flexing their bodies as though showing them off were an achievement. Imagine him standing in the corner, scribbling verses while a man across the pool tries in vain to impress onlookers by lifting weights, only to slip and fall dramatically into the water. The baths were easy targets for satire, and the poets obliged. Even the smell drew complaints. Though perfumes and oils were common, so too was the stench of sweat, mildew, and smoke from the hypocaust. Seneca described the blend of odors as overwhelming. Men oiled with cheap fragrances, the acrid tang of burning wood, and the grease of food vendors mixing in the damp air. For some, this was Rome's perfume, the scent of life itself. For others, it was a symbol of decline, a literal stench of indulgence. And yet, despite these criticisms, the baths endured. Why? Because for every voice grumbling about softness, thousands more longed for the heat, the gossip, the relief. The baths were a paradox criticized as corrupting, yet embraced as essential. They reflected Rome itself, powerful, extravagant, flawed, yet impossible to resist. It is worth imagining, though, how those criticisms might have sounded to ordinary ears. A baker, exhausted after hours at the oven, would hardly think of moral corruption as he sank into warm water. A soldier, sore from drills, would not see softness in the steam, but medicine. A woman enjoying laughter with friends in the tepidarium would not think herself decadent, but simply human. The critics may have been right in part, but their voices were drowned out by the splashes and sighs of the many, so the baths became a mirror. To some, they showed Rome's strength, her ability to harness water, to build beauty, to share luxury with her people. To others, they showed weakness, indulgence, softness, corruption. And perhaps both were true. For in the history of every empire, there are spaces that embody both glory and fragility at once. The Roman baths were one of those spaces, and yet, for all their critics, the baths remained irresistible. They endured until the aqueducts crumbled and the furnaces fell cold. Critics could frown, philosophers could scowl, poets could mock, but the baths filled day after day with laughter, chatter, steam, and sighs. But while some saw them as a danger to Roman spirit, others saw them as sheer entertainment places where food, music, games, and spectacles blended with water and stone. In the next part, we will slip into that lighter side of the baths, where leisure was not only about cleansing, but about delight, where the air was filled with song, the crunch of roasted chickpeas, and the laughter of people simply enjoying being alive. Imagine now stepping into the baths, not for politics, not for philosophy, not even for solemn purification, but simply for pleasure. For many Romans, the thermae were playgrounds of leisure, spaces where the ordinary rhythms of life dissolved into food, music, aims, and simple joy. Let us wander into that world, a little lighter, a little more playful, and see how the baths entertained as much as they cleansed. The moment you enter the palestra, before even reaching the pools, you hear laughter and shouts. Boys are tossing a ball back and forth, a leather sphere stuffed with feathers, while others cheer and clap. Wrestlers grapple in the sand, their bodies slick with oil, the crowd applauding as one pins another. The air here is alive, like the energy before a festival. It is not silent stretching or meditative calm, it is vigorous, rowdy, alive. Picture yourself walking past, feeling the thud of fists into punching bags, the slap of bodies hitting sand, the cheer of victory when someone is lifted into the air in triumph. This was Roman fitness, but also Roman theater, a performance of strength and agility for all to see. Inside, the sounds shift. In the tepidarium, you might hear music. A musician with a lyre plucks gentle notes, their sound softened by the steam. Perhaps a flute trills, its melody curling through the mist. Imagine reclining on a warm bench, oil still slick on your skin, while music drifts lazily overhead. The baths were not simply about cleansing, they were sensory worlds, where every sense was indulged. Your skin feels the heat, your ears hear the song, your nose catches rosemary from perfumed oils, and your tongue soon tastes roasted snacks. Ah, yes, the food. The baths often had vendors near entrances or in courtyards, ready to serve hungry bathers. Imagine the aroma of sausages sizzling on small braziers, the crunch of roasted chickpeas sprinkled with salt, or figs dipped in honey and offered on wooden skewers. You might step out of the caldarium flushed and thirsty, only to find a boy offering cups of watered wine or pomegranate juice. There were cakes too flat, sweetened with honey, sometimes topped with nuts. Picture yourself with damp hair, robe loosely draped, nibbling on a honey cake while steam curls into the twilight air. It is an image that feels both decadent and ordinary, a reminder that Rome's luxuries were also part of its everyday rhythm. Some bathhouses even hosted performances. Imagine a troupe of jugglers entertaining a small crowd in a courtyard, balls flashing in lamplight, while children squeal with delight. Or picture a poet standing on a low platform, reciting verses to anyone willing to listen. The steam blurs the edges of the crowd, voices hush, and the rhythm of the words mingles with a drip of water. For those who lingered after their soak, there were lectures, readings, even small debates. Leisure and learning were not separate worlds but woven into one tapestry. And then there was conversation, the endless tide of it. Imagine sitting in the warm tepidarium, half submerged in water, while friends share jokes, gossip, and stories. A man tells of his disastrous attempt to impress a girl at the market. Another recounts a gladiator's dramatic tumble in the amphitheater. Someone jokes that their strigil scraped more dirt from their body than their landlord has ever scraped from his conscience. Laughter erupts, echoing through the chamber. It is humor softened by steam, ordinary yet unforgettable. Children, too, found delight here. Picture a boy daring his friend to stay the longest in the frigidarium, their teeth chattering, their squeals bouncing off the walls. Or a girl giggling as she splashes her mother with water in the tepidarium. For children, the baths were playgrounds as much as cleansing halls, filled with wonder and mischief. They would remember these afternoons for years, associating marble mosaics, not with solemnity, but with the joy of laughter and play. Even small details carried delight. Imagine attendants carrying trays of scented oils, offering them like fine wines. Choose lavender for calm, myrtle for strength, or rose for beauty. Bathers debated scents the way we might debate coffee blends today. Or picture a man slipping into the caldarium with exaggerated groans, pretending the heat is unbearable, only to grin when his friends laugh at his performance. Humor was everywhere, from the vendors to the bathers themselves. The baths also offered spectacles in their sheer beauty. Picture fountains in the courtyards, water spraying into the air and catching sunlight like diamonds. Gardens stretched with shaded porticos, trimmed hedges, and statues gleaming white. After the intensity of hot water, you could stroll slowly among these gardens, your damp robe fluttering in the breeze, listening to the splash of fountains and the murmur of other bathers. Leisure was not rushed here. It was unhurried, a whole afternoon's pleasure. And beyond the delights of food, music, and laughter, the baths also offered simple human connection. Imagine two old friends meeting unexpectedly in the tepidarium after months apart, their joy spilling into loud greetings. Picture strangers striking up conversation in the frigidarium, laughing together as they shiver in the cold. Picture a woman leaning to her neighbor to share a quiet word, the beginnings of a friendship or alliance that might last years. The baths were magnets for human connection, weaving relationships as casually as steam curls into the air. But sometimes, leisure turned into spectacle of vanity. Picture a man flexing his muscles too often, glancing around to see if anyone noticed. Picture a woman arranging her hair with studied care, hoping whispers about her beauty ripple through the crowd. Vanity lived here, but in a way that amused rather than disgusted. The baths were spaces where people could be human in all their forms vain, kind, silly, weary, hopeful dot. As the day lengthened and the lamps were lit, the atmosphere shifted. Voices softened, music stilled, and laughter faded into murmurs. Leisure melted into calm. People left slowly, robes pulled around damp shoulders, their stomachs full, their minds lighter. Vendors packed their trays. Musicians plucked one last note, and the baths grew quieter. It was a slow fading of sound, like the dimming of a song. The Romans did not see a sharp line between leisure and life. To them, the baths were not a break from the world, but part of it, a daily stage where joy and duty blended. A senator could eat a honey cake while discussing grain taxes. A soldier could wrestle in the palestra before plunging into the cold pool. A child could laugh. A poet could sing. A philosopher could scowl all under the same roof. And yet one cannot help but wonder, with so much joy, gossip, and ritual, what happened in moments of crisis? When illness spread, when tragedy struck, how did the baths respond? In the next part, we will walk into those darker days, when the warmth of the caldarium could not always ward off the chill of fate. Not every day in the Roman baths was filled with laughter, music, and roasted chickpeas. Sometimes the baths echoed with a different kind of sound. Coughs, whispers of fear, or the tense hush of a city facing something it could not fully control. For in the midst of the steam and the chatter, illness sometimes walked unseen, slipping quietly from one bather to another, carried in the water, the air, or the simple touch of an oily hand. Tonight, let us linger on those moments of crisis, when the baths, so often symbols of vitality, became reminders of human frailty. Imagine entering the caldarium on a warm evening, expecting the familiar comfort of heat and steam. But instead of laughter, you notice a different energy. A man sits in the corner, coughing into his hand, his skin pale, his eyes sunken. Another whispers that a fever has gripped several families nearby. The baths, crowded and close, are perfect vessels for the spread of sickness. In those days, without our knowledge of germs or viruses, illness was mysterious, often attributed to foul air, angry gods, or imbalances of the body's humors. Yet everyone knew that when one fell ill, many followed. Roman doctors, the Medici, sometimes recommended bathing as treatment. A feverish man might be plunged into the frigidarium to cool his blood. Someone with aching joints might be soothed in the caldarium, the heat easing stiffness. But medicine and superstition blurred. Imagine a woman dipping an amulet into the pool, hoping the water's sacred essence would guard her from plague. Or a man whispering prayers to Apollo, god of healing, before stepping into the tepidarum. Hope and fear mingled in the steam, just as surely as perfumes and sweat did. During times of plague, however, the baths could become places of dread. Picture the city in the grip of pestilence, smoke from funeral pyres rising in the distance. The once busy appetitarium now feels empty, the benches bare, only a handful of bathers daring to linger. Those who remain look at each other warily, wondering if the cough echoing in the caldarium might signal doom. The marble mosaics, once alive with splashes, reflect only still water. Silence spreads, heavy and strange. And yet, even in such times, the baths did not always close. Some argued they were needed more than ever. What better place to cleanse oneself, they said, than in the waters of the gods? The irony was sharp. The very place sought for health could become a nest of contagion. Imagine the attendants still sweeping floors, still skimming oils from the pools, even as fear gnawed at their hearts. Imagine a physician advising moderation. Bathe, but not too long soak. But not in crowded rooms. The advice sounds familiar, echoing across centuries whenever humans gather in uncertain times. There were other crises too, besides sickness. Fires sometimes broke out in the furnaces beneath the baths. Picture the sudden roar of flames escaping their channels, the shouts of attendants as bathers scrambled for exits, robes clutched hastily, sandals slipping on wet floors. Marble cracked from the heat, smoke billowed through the hypocaust, and what was meant to be controlled warmth threatened to consume the whole building. The baths were triumphs of engineering, but when that engineering failed, chaos followed swiftly. There were political crises as well. Imagine the baths filled one afternoon with murmurs of news. An emperor assassinated, a general defeated, a rebellion rising in a province. The chatter swells, voices overlap, arguments flare. Some speak boldly against the emperor, others defend him fiercely. In the misty air, words grow heated, insults fly, and suddenly the baths become less a sanctuary and more a senate in miniature. Deals struck in the tepidarum could shape the city outside. Rumors birthed in the caldarium might topple reputations by the next day. In moments like these, the baths revealed their double nature, both healing and dangerous, both calming and incendiary. Even natural disasters touched the baths. When earthquakes shook Rome, as they did from time to time, vast domes cracked and tiles rained down into the pools. Imagine the sudden crash of stone hitting water, the screams of bathers scrambling away, the mosaics splintering beneath feet. To those present, it must have felt as though Neptune himself had risen in anger. And when the tremors ceased, when dust hung in the air like mist, the silence was heavy with awe and fear. Yet through all these crises, Romans returned again and again. Why? Perhaps because the baths offered not only comfort, but community. Even in illness, even in uncertainty, people gathered there. To skip the baths was to break the rhythm of daily life. To go, even when fearful, was to feel the embrace of routine, the reassurance that some things endured. Picture a man stepping cautiously into the tepidarum during plague days, glancing around nervously, yet sinking into the warm water with a sigh. In that sigh, there is both fear and defiance, a refusal to let the world's troubles steal this small pleasure. And perhaps there was wisdom in that. For even when sickness spread, or politics soured, or earthquakes struck, the baths taught Romans something about resilience. They reminded them that life is never free of danger, yet still worth savoring. Steam and water, laughter and silence, gossip and prayer, all of it swirled together. As inseparable as the droplets of mist rising from the pool's dot. So as we picture these moments of crisis, let us not imagine only despair. Imagine also the resilience. Attendants still sweeping, vendors still selling figs, musicians still plucking lyres, even as uncertainty lingered. The baths were fragile, yes, but they were also stubborn. enduring through plague, fire, and fear, until at last Rome itself began to falter. And this brings us to a curious thought. What echoes of those ancient baths survive in our own lives today? How have we carried forward their rituals of water, warmth, and community into modern spas, gyms, and hammams? In the next part, we will step gently across centuries, tracing how the Roman habit of bathing did not end with the empire, but rippled outward into cultures far beyond. Now let us step gently out of Rome and walk into the centuries that followed, tracing the ripples of the Roman bath far beyond the empire itself. Though the great thermae crumbled, though aqueducts dried and hypocausts fell cold, the memory of Roman bathing never truly disappeared. Instead, it reshaped itself in new lands, new cultures, new forms. To understand our own spas, saunas, and hammams, we must see how the Roman ritual survived long after the empire faded into ruin. Imagine the fall of Rome. The aqueducts cut, the marble halls echoing only with wind. Travelers wandered through these ruins, awestruck, unsure how ordinary people could once have bathed in palaces that dwarfed cathedrals. For a time, bathing in Europe declined. The Middle Ages were wary of public baths, sometimes associating them with disease, sin, or excess. But the Roman idea that water could cleanse both body and spirit was too strong to vanish completely. It hid, waiting to return. In the East, however, it never disappeared. The Byzantine Empire carried on the tradition, building baths in Constantinople that echoed their Roman predecessors. The mosaics remained, the steam still rose, though Christian rituals began to shape them differently. Imagine stepping into a Byzantine bath, hearing chants outside from a nearby church, but inside finding the same sequence of cold, warm, and hot rooms. The architecture shifted, but the rhythm endured. And then, across the Mediterranean, the Islamic world embraced and transformed the Roman bath. The hammam was born part bathhouse, part spiritual cleansing space, intimately tied to faith. In Islam, cleanliness was and is part of ritual devotion, a preparation for prayer. The hammam carried the Roman sequence of heat and cold, but gave it new meaning. Imagine a hammam in Damascus or Cairo. Domed ceilings pierced with small star-shaped windows, shafts of light cutting through steam, tiled floors shimmering in blues and greens. Attendants scrubbed your skin with rough mitts. Oils are rubbed into your body. Steam curls like incense. It is both cleansing and sacred, both earthly and divine. In medieval Europe, public baths survived too, though with a different reputation. Imagine wandering into a bath in a German or French town in the 13th century. Wooden tubs line a hall. Couples sit together, eating, drinking, sometimes flirting. The steam is there, but so is a looser morality, one that church leaders frowned upon. Some baths became notorious for indulgence, earning the suspicion that Romans themselves had once endured. Yet still, the water drew people in. Even when officials tried to close them, bathhouses reappeared, because humans craved the warmth, the company. The cleansing ritual. In Russia, the banya grew wooden huts with roaring stoves, steam thick enough to sting. Branches used to whip the skin and improve circulation. Imagine the crackle of fire, the hiss of water thrown on hot stones, the thwack of birch twigs against shoulders, laughter echoing in the haze. The banya carried echoes of Rome's caldarium, but with its own raw energy, suited to snowy forests and frozen rivers. And in Japan, though independent of Rome, a parallel tradition emerged, the onsen and the sentu. Hot springs bubbling from the earth became communal spaces where water itself, drawn directly from volcanic veins, cleansed and healed. Imagine lowering yourself into steaming mineral water, snow falling softly outside, mountains rising around you. Though distant in geography and culture, the impulse is the same: to gather, to soak, to renew body and spirit, The Renaissance rekindled Europe's fascination with antiquity, and with it, baths returned in elegance. Italian cities revived public bathhouses, inspired by Roman ruins rediscovered beneath their feet. Scholars pored over descriptions of ancient thermae, and architects tried to recreate their grandeur. Imagine a Florentine nobleman commissioning a bath with marble basins and frescoed walls, hoping to imitate the splendor of Caracalla. The Romans were not only remembered, they were imitated, their ideas reborn in new stone and plaster dot by the Victorian era. Baths became modern again, this time tied to hygiene, medicine, and the growing concern with public health. Cities built municipal bathhouses to serve crowded populations, some with swimming pools, some with steam rooms, many modeled consciously or not on Roman plans. Imagine a Victorian worker stepping into a tiled hall with brass taps and echoing ceilings, scrubbing off the soot of factory labor. It was not luxury now, but necessity, a civic duty to keep citizens clean and healthy. The Roman spirit lingered still. Bathing was a public act, tied to community and identity. Even today, we feel their influence. Step into a modern spa with its sequence of sauna, steam, plunge pool, and massage, and you are retracing Roman steps. Step into a Turkish hammam, hear the echo of voices under domed ceilings, and you are hearing Rome's whisper. Step into a Scandinavian sauna, feel the sweat pour, plunge into icy water, and you are replaying the Roman love of contrast, of heat and cold. Even the locker rooms of gyms echo faintly with the structure of the apoditerium, the shared rituals of unbracing, of equality and exposure. The Romans may not have invented bathing, but they perfected its architecture, its rhythm, its place at the heart of civic life. And because of them, across centuries and continents, humans have continued to see water not only as necessity, but as ritual. Whether in marble halls, tiled domes, wooden banyas, or mountain springs, we return to the same truth, that water gathers us, cleanses us, reminds us of our shared humanity, and so the baths live on, not only in ruins, but in every sauna, every spa, every hammam where steam curls upward and conversation drifts like mist. Rome may have fallen, but in every drop of water that splashes against warm stone, a fragment of Rome endures. But as we step back from history and into reflection, another question emerges. Why do humans, across time, return again and again to the act of bathing together? What is it about water, warmth, and community that feels so deeply necessary? In the next part, we will explore not just the facts of the baths, but the philosophy behind them, the reasons why, even today, we seek steam, stillness, and shared space as if we are following an ancient memory. Let us now pause in the steam and reflect more deeply. We have wandered through marble halls, heard the laughter of children, the whispers of politics, the mutterings of philosophers, the cries of merchants, the hum of gossip, and even the hush of crisis. We have followed the Roman baths from their grandeur to their ruins, and onward into hammams, banyas, spas, and modern wellness retreats. And yet, beneath all these shifting forms, there lies something older, something more universal. Why is it that human beings return, again and again, to water, heat, and community? Why do we find such comfort in the act of bathing together? Imagine yourself back in the caldarium, the hot chamber, steam rising in clouds around you. Your body is bare, your senses softened. The man beside you is a senator, the man across the pool a baker, the boy splashing in the corner someone's son. And yet here, stripped of clothes, perfumes, and armor, you are all simply human. The bath was, at its heart, a theater of equality. For a society as hierarchical as Rome, this was remarkable. The baths were one of the few spaces where distinctions blurred. To be seen as simply a body among bodies was both humbling and freeing. And perhaps that is the first truth. Bathing together reminds us of our shared humanity. Across cultures, communal bathing breaks down walls. In a hammam in Istanbul, men and women alike sit side by side with strangers, steam softening their faces into a shared glow. In a Japanese onsen, the ritual of entering silently, washing carefully before soaking, shows respect not just for the water, but for the community. In a Russian banya, the laughter of friends being playfully whipped with birch branches echoes the Roman palestra's noise. The forms differ, but the essence is the same. To bathe together is to remember that, beneath our roles and our masks, we are all fragile creatures needing warmth, rest, and renewal. The second truth lies in rhythm. Life, whether in Rome or today, is fast, demanding, filled with noise. The baths offered a counter-rhythm, a slowing down. Imagine walking from the frigidarium's shock of cold into the tepidarium's gentle warmth, then into the caldarium's heavy heat, and back again. The body moves from tension to release, from contraction to expansion. This was not accidental. The sequence itself was therapeutic, aligning with the human need to alternate between stress and calm, effort and rest. Even now, we recognize it in practices of hot and cold therapy, in contrast baths for athletes, in spa rituals designed to shock and soothe. The Romans did not need scientific data. They simply listened to their bodies. And the truth they discovered still resonates. Health is in balance, not in extremes. The third truth is memory. Water itself holds memory for us. As infants, we float in the amniotic warmth of the womb. To return to water is, in some ways, to return to that earliest cradle. Perhaps this is why the baths felt more than physical. They soothed not only muscle, but spirit. Imagine sinking into warm water, closing your eyes, feeling the world fade. In that moment, you are not senator, soldier, baker, or slave. You are simply alive, suspended in warmth, breathing slowly. It is a return, a reminder of origins. The Romans may not have described it in those terms, but they felt it. That is why poets wrote of baths with reverence, why mosaics depicted gods of water, why people whispered prayers as they stepped into pools. It was instinctive, older than empire, older than history itself. And then there is the truth of vulnerability. To undress before others, to reveal scars, skin, age, is an act of exposure. In the baths, people could not hide their bodies behind armor or silk. Their stories were written on skin, the scar of a soldier, the wrinkles of age, the softness of wealth, the rough calluses of labor. This vulnerability created honesty. In the steam, stripped of costume, people were reminded of mortality, of the fleeting nature of beauty and strength. And yet, this did not diminish them. It made them human, together. Even today, when we step into saunas or spas, part of the unease comes from this same exposure, and part of the relief as well. Vulnerability shared becomes strength. And finally, there is the truth of ritual itself. The baths were not random acts. They were repeated daily, weekly, woven into the calendar of life. Rituals anchor us. They remind us who we are, where we belong. For Romans, to bathe was to reaffirm membership in society. To be absent too often was suspicious, a sign of aloofness or arrogance. To bathe was to participate in the rhythm of community, to submit to the same steam, the same sequence, the same size as one's neighbors. Ritual binds people together in ways laws and armies cannot. That is why emperors funded baths. They understood that shared ritual was power. When we see this, we realize why the baths echo even today. They were not just about hygiene. They were about humanity itself. They addressed physical need, emotional need, social need, and spiritual need all at once. They gave Romans a space to connect, to pause, to reflect, to laugh, to scheme, to heal. And though the marble cracked, the idea endured because those needs never ended. So when we step into a modern spa, when we sit in a sauna, when we dip into a hot spring, we are participating in a lineage older than nations, older even than Rome. We are listening to an ancient truth that water whispers. Slow down, gather together, cleanse, renew. The Romans may have made the baths grand, but the impulse itself is human, timeless, unchanging. And as we draw closer to the end of our journey, one final reflection awaits. We have walked through steam and stone, gossip and grandeur, philosophy and pleasure. We have listened to echoes of laughter and whispers of fear. But what do the baths teach us today, as we lie here drifting toward sleep? In the final part, we will gather the threads of this long journey into a quiet reflection, linking past to present, and leaving you with a thought to carry gently into dreams. And now, we arrive at the final chapter of our journey. We have wandered through the marble halls of Rome. We have felt the warmth of steam and the sting of cold pools. We have overheard gossip, laughter, and whispers of fear. We have watched the baths rise in grandeur, crumble in ruin, and echo across centuries into hammams, banyas, and spas. Tonight, as you settle deeper into rest, let us gather all those threads together into a single gentle reflection, one that links the past to the present and carries you softly toward dreams. Imagine, one last time, stepping into a Roman bathhouse at dusk. The lamps are lit, their flames flickering against polished stone. The air smells faintly of olive oil and smoke, with a hint of honey cake drifting from a vendor's tray. The voices of bathers have grown softer now, no longer loud with debate or boasting, but murmuring with contentment. A boy splashes quietly in the frigidarium. A soldier reclines in the caldarium, eyes closed, letting the steam ease his scars. A woman braids her friend's damp hair in the tepidarium, their laughter subdued but warm. You walk slowly across the floor, feeling the cool stone underfoot, and pause at the edge of the pool. The water shimmers in lamplight, reflecting mosaics of dolphins leaping forever beneath the surface. You step in. Warmth embraces you. Time seems to stop. In that moment. You are not in the 1st century, nor the 15th, nor the 21st. You are simply human, sharing in something that stretches across millennia, the need to pause, to cleanse, to feel warmth on the skin and community in the air. This is the enduring legacy of the baths. Not the marble, not the mosaics, not even the engineering, though those were wondrous, but the reminder that, in the midst of empire, war, politics, and philosophy, people still sought the simple, human comfort of water, and company. Think for a moment of how much we still crave this today. We gather at pools, spas, gyms, saunas, beaches. We sit together in warmth, talking, laughing, sometimes simply being. We post pictures of ourselves soaking, swimming, floating, the modern echo of ancient Roman boasting. We still buy oils, perfumes, scrubs, soaps. We still laugh at those who take themselves too seriously in these spaces, and we still bond with strangers over the shared vulnerability of exposure. In ways we rarely notice, we are still Romans in spirit, drawn to the same rituals, carried by the same currents. And perhaps this is why the ruins of Roman baths still touch us. To walk among the broken arches of Caracalla or Diocletian's Thermae is to feel not only awe at their scale, but recognition. We can imagine ourselves there, as clearly as if we had once been citizens of Rome. We can almost hear the splashes, the laughter, the whispers. The baths feel familiar, even after 2,000 years, because the human needs they met have not changed. Cleanliness, health, leisure, connection. These are timeless. As you drift toward sleep, let yourself reflect on what the baths reveal. That beauty changes, but the need to be seen never does. That strength fades, but the need for comfort endures. that gossip dies away, but the need for connection remains. The Romans, in their grandeur and flaws, understood this better than most. That is why they built baths not only for the rich, but for the people, making marble and steam the shared inheritance of a city. And perhaps that is the final lesson, that the simple act of gathering, of sharing warmth, of pausing together in water, can hold a society together as surely as walls or laws. Empires rise and fall, marble crumbles, but the memory of that warmth, the sigh after plunging into cold water, the laughter echoing in steam lives on. Even now, when you slip into a hot bath after a long day, you are repeating a gesture known to millions before you. You are, in a way, stepping back into Rome God. So as you lie here tonight, let your mind drift gently like steam rising through lamplight. Imagine the warmth on your skin, the sound of water trickling into pools, the hush of voices softened by mist. Let the noise of the day dissolve, as if scraped away by an ancient strigil. Let yourself be renewed, body and spirit alike. You are part of a long story, one that stretches from ancient aqueducts to modern showers, from marble mosaics to bathroom tiles. It is the story of humans seeking comfort, connection, and calm in water. And as you close your eyes, remember this. History is not only battles and emperors, but also sighs of relief, laughter and steam, and the quiet moments when ordinary people paused to be simply human. The baths remind us that even in the grandest of civilizations, peace was found not always in triumph, but in warm water and good company. As you drift off tonight, remember beauty changes, but the need to be seen never does. Strength fades, but the need to rest endures. Empires fall, but the comfort of water lingers, timeless, waiting. If this brought you calm, subscribe so we can share another journey together. And perhaps share this with someone who thinks they'd survive. A day in ancient Rome. You may remind them that even emperors needed their baths. Good night. May the warmth of history and the quiet of water carry you gently into dreams.